Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hi, I'm so glad to see y'all here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to this presentation to hear about the namesake of our county, Kendall of Kendall. My name is Robin Stauber. I am the Adult Services Librarian here at the library. I am also a part of the Kendall County Historical Commission, and this is a joint program that we're doing. This year marks the 160th anniversary of the founding of our county. So Bryden Moore, who is our local historian and also a Kendall County Historical Commission member, is going to talk to you about who George W. Kendall was. Afterwards, we're going to have a little cake and coffee in the back to celebrate. If you guys would like to join, we'll also be doing a very brief little ribbon cutting on the opening of the exhibit. And the exhibit will stay up in the library through March. So without further ado, I think just Bryden Extraordinaire is here. Thank you, Bryden.
Thank you, Robin. Just wanted to introduce my technical support. I happen to be married to the love of my life, Kay. And good morning, and thank you for coming out this morning. Today's presentation regards the life of our Kendall County namesake, George Wilkins Kendall. However, with the passing of the county's 160th anniversary in January, I'd like to take a few moments detailing the early years of Kendall County's development up to its organization in 1862. Prior to German immigration, our hill country land lay vacant. It was considered a no man's land due to Native American presence. The Big Bang of the Adelsvereins colonization efforts created New Braunfels in 1845 and Fredericksburg in 1846, two isolated communities in formerly unpopulated frontier land. With a massive land void of over 60 miles between the two outposts, the Rhines foundations also set in motion the opportunity for land ownership past the fringes of civilization. German immigrant pioneers slowly filled in the void between the Adelsvereins' two instant city anchors. Now, originally, our land was in a large bare land district. It actually went up to Wyoming. Until Comal County was established in 1846. And at that point, our future Kendall County land was divided. The western third was in Bear County, and the eastern two-thirds in Comal County. Our first pioneer, Nicholas Zink, carves out a homestead where the Pinta Trail crossed the Guadalupe River in 1847. And by the 1850 census, out of Comal County's 1,723 residents, almost 50 settlers were in the mountains region of Comal County, which became Sisterdale when Otmar von Baer received his postal commission for Sisterdale in 1851. At the time, this was only the third post office behind New Braunfels and Fredericksburg in the hill country. This 1855 Colton map was the earliest I could find citing the community, however they mistakenly labeled it Sisterville. Zink, von Baer, and George Friedrich Holekamp are specifically highlighted on this snippet from an 1850 Herman Wilkie map. These are the three are considered the first settlers in future Kendall County. By the early 1850s, the settlements in our future county included Sisterdale, a pre-Bernie communal farm on the Cibolo, scattered ranches in the Sabinas Creek, Curry's Creek, and Spring Creek regions, and a pre-Comfort pioneers along Cypress Creek. With the exception of a unique enclave of American settlers in the Curry's Creek region, these settlements were heavily populated by German immigrants. Bernie is our first platted community in 1852. Comfort is plotted in 1854. In 1855, we're still split between Bear and Comal counties. Now, most historical accountings reference an 1859 petition by regional citizens to form a new county, but they missed an earlier petition. The first initiative to form a new county was actually launched in 1855 when 5 individual petitions to form a new county were submitted by citizens to the Texas legislature. Clearly identical in both handwriting and words, the petitions were addressed to the Honorable Senate and House of Representatives. All 5 documents lead off on the first page with the words, "We, the undersigned citizens of Comal and Bexar County." And on the second page, just above the signatures, each specific petition indicated a discrete region: Sisterdale, Comfort, Guadalupe and Sabine, Bernie, and Leon Springs. A total of 172 signatures were collected on all 5 petitions. And as it turns out, all 5 petitions were written by the same man and matched Gustav Tyson's script. Now, for those of you who don't know, just 3 years earlier, Mr. Tyson partnered with surveyor John James and began selling lots of the newly plotted city of Bernie. Tyson was promoting his real estate venture. Embedded within the petition, Bernie is well situated on the main and only good road from San Antonio to Fredericksburg, and postured that it only made sense that it serve as a county seat. Our pre-Kendall County citizens agreed with what was written. It expressed their laments that their existing county seats were very inconvenient. They had to travel great distances and over rough roads to reach them. Since Comfort was in Bexar County and Bernie, Sisterdale, and the Curries Creek region were in Comal County, their respective county seats were San Antonio and New Braunfels. And these pioneers did have a point, not discounting the rough terrain. As the crow flies, it was 43, 38, and 46 miles, respectively, between Comal's county seat of New Braunfels and Bernie, Curries Creek, and Sisterdale. And even though it was a more established and direct pathway, a whopping 52 miles from Comfort to San Antonio. So what happened? Well, the settlers were dismayed with what transpired next, as it wasn't remotely close to their wishes. Comfort is rolled into Kerr County when it is created in 1856, and the remainder of future Kendall County becomes part of Blanco County when it is established in 1858. After one more unified petition in 1859, indignantly protesting the extremely rough road to their new county seat of Blanco, and a wait of over 2 more years, Kendall County is finally carved out of Kerr and Blanco's counties when it was established on January the 10th, 1862. And as it turns out, Kendall County was the only Texas county out of Texas's 254 counties to be established during the Civil War. Interesting name for my county, Kendall. Rare is the county that's named for a living incumbent resident. What's even rarer was George Wilkin Kendall's path to fame. He was not from a founding family of Texas. He was not a politician, a Texas Ranger, a lawyer, nor a war hero. His career enterprise was located in Louisiana. New Hampshire was his birth state. Yet George Wilkins Kendall had unique talents and an incredible life. He was a man who dreamed and then lived his dreams. When casting about for a new county name this morning, you will learn how George Wilkins Kendall's name would have been placed at the top of any short list. George Wilkins Kendall was bright, well-written, adventurous, driven, curious, and creative, with a great sense of humor. So how does a man from the Northeast, with his lifelong business headquartered in the South, wind up having a newly formed Texas county named after him? Let's roll back the clock to 1809. George Wilkins Kendall was born on August 22nd, 1809 in Mount Vernon, New Hampshire, the first of 5 children of Thaddeus and Abigail Wilkins Kendall. Times were hard, and Thaddeus had to move his family from one settlement to another. At the age of 7, George visited his maternal grandfather and wound up living with him. Deacon Samuel Wilkins, George's maternal grandfather, was also the source of George's given middle name. And here George learned to read, and when it was a topic that interested him, he would devour it. Geography was his favorite subject. He looked at dog-eared maps and well-worn maps and dog-eared books, and he dreamed. He longed to visit far-flung places. Young Kendall wanted to travel and desired to live a life of action and adventure. He remained under his grandfather's roof for 10 years. I believe Deacon Wilkins had an extremely positive influence every Kendall signature always included his middle name, Wilkins. At 15, he announced to his family that he wanted to be a printer, and at age 16, he's in Boston, Massachusetts, living with his uncle, working as a printer's apprentice. At 17, George Wilkins Kendall is off on his life of adventure. He goes to, traveling on his own, he goes to New York and has trouble finding a printing-related job. So he explores the Midwest and the Southeast. And by his 26th birthday in 1835, George has been in at least 14 states and the territory of Wisconsin. In 1835, there were only 24 states. After arriving in New Orleans, Louisiana, Kendall co-founds a newspaper with F.A. Lumsden in 1837 called the Picayune. Here's a banner from the inaugural January 25th edition. The Picayune was the name of an old Spanish coin and was worth about 6 1/4 cents, and that's exactly what the paper cost. At this time, there were no phones, there wasn't even news wires, the telegraph had not been invented yet. So newspapers were a very important method of communicating. New Orleans was a bustling port town of 80,000. Much of the news flowed south with the Mississippi River on incoming boats. So in a classic Kendall move, in order to out-hustle the competing newspapers, he would take a small printing press and board a boat going north on the Mississippi River. Getting off at either Memphis, Natchez, or Baton Rouge, he would catch a boat headed back to New Orleans. Then, while returning home, Kendall would interview folks and use the small press to print up the news. Upon reaching New Orleans, he would walk off the ship with printed news and beat the competition. Kendall was involved with the Picayune newspaper the rest of his life, and the newspaper is still printed today, 185 years after its founding. There's another one of these anniversaries we've been talking about. This portrait of Kendall is estimated to be painted during his early years in New Orleans. We'll move forward from his initial years in the printing business and the founding of the Picayune to the 1841 Santa Fe Expedition. The Texan Santa Fe Expedition, a political, military, commercial venture, was occasioned by the Republic of Texas's President Lamar's desire to divert to Texas at least part of the trade that was carried over the Santa Fe Trail. Texas needed trade, and the Santa Fe market apparently offered the best opportunities. Kendall always wanted to take a journey of exploration, and the Republic of Texas was happy to have him. Who better than the editor of the New Orleans Picayune to chronicle this adventure to and through the outer edges of civilization into the West? Pre-expedition in Austin, Kendall was informed that they would not leave for 10 days. And during this window of time, Kendall experienced two significant events. First, he joined a prearranged side trip to San Antonio. This was Kendall's first trip to San Antonio, but it was not the city that captured his imagination. It was on this side trip that he discovered the hill country. He was impressed with the clear, cool streams, the wide valleys, the drier climate and gentle breezes. And for Kendall, this was the ideal landscape. And as we will learn, he never forgot about the beautiful natural beauty of the hill country. The second significant event, after returning to Austin with time on his hands, Kendall decided to take a swim one evening in the Colorado River, but it was dark out. He missed his normal path, fell many feet over a cliff onto a boulder, and broke his ankle. He worried that he would not be able to go on the expedition because he could not walk, but President Lamar visited his bedside, and shortly thereafter, Kendall received confirmation that a special wagon would be provided to carry him. The Republic of Texas launched on June 19, 1841. Traders with wagon loads of merchandise, accompanied by a military escort as protection against the Native Americans, would cross the plains to exchange their goods for bullion and furs. There were 24 wagons in all, over 300 participants, including many soldiers. The goal was to travel through the wilds of Texas to the capital of New Mexico, Santa Fe. But there was no road. There was no designated route to guide them through this unknown and uncharted expanse. And they did not know it at the time, but they had miscalculated several things, including underestimating the distance they would travel by nearly half. 3 weeks into the trip, they labored through quicksand and avoided a prairie fire. 1 month in the expedition, it was decided to burn their tents just to lighten their loads. Kendall was finally able to ride a horse. The expedition's morale was low and spread out over the prairies, and they were still trying to get to Santa Fe, and as they would eventually learn, they were still 6 weeks away. This venture of a lifetime turned out to be a dangerous trip, as all suffered hunger and thirst. There were loss of lives and Indian attacks. An excerpt from Fayette Copeland's Kendall of the Picayune. By August, the weakness of slow starvation slackened the pace of the expedition. The men became inured to camping without clear water, to eating half-cooked meat without salt. None of the rumors was as bad as the reality. They had no water. Repeatedly, Fayette Copeland, Kendall's biographer, shares their torments after days of hunger and thirst and marching, after nights when Indians stole horses and mules. The country too rough for even a mule to cross. Copeland tells us the men were desperate. Every tortoise and snake, every living and creeping thing was seized upon and swallowed. Occasionally, a skunk or polecat would reward someone more fortunate than the rest, but even 7 out of 10 of us were compelled to journey on without a morsel of anything to appease our sufferings. And Indians not only stole their horses, a young man dashed up with news of an Indian attack on men who were out on a scout for water. Texans had been overtaken, slain, scalped, and their bodies mutilated. Finally, after 3 months of traveling, when Kendall's expedition arrived into New Mexico on September the 16th, they were not greeted, but arrested. The Texans had expected to be welcomed by the citizens of New Mexico and had certainly not anticipated armed resistance. But the governor of New Mexico had learned of the expedition and had detachments out awaiting the arrival of the Texans. Most of the party had survived the journey to New Mexico, but now they were imprisoned. On October 17th, a forced march to Mexico began. It was 2,000 miles and on foot. During one stretch, they had to travel 40 miles on foot, but that was not as bad as a few days later. They had to travel 40 hours straight without any food or water. Kendall was now walking on an ankle that had been broken just 4 months before. From Fayette Copeland's book on Kendall, the days and nights stretched into a nightmare which Kendall was never able to erase from his mind. From dawn until dusk, the Texans were driven until they scarcely had energy enough to eat their scanty rations. If they faltered or pretended to be sick on the road, there were instructions to shoot them and bring in their ears. Hunger in the rivers of the trip took their toll. John McAllister, a volunteer from Tennessee, sank down in exhaustion. He was shot. 2 exhausted Texans met death at the hands of the guards. It was a nightmare they never forgot. They averaged about 29 miles a day. After Christmas, outside of Mexico City, Kendall's party stopped marching and all were placed in jail. They had traveled 2,000 miles in a little over 2 months. Kendall remained jailed until influential friends secured his release in May 1842, after spending 7 months in captivity. On his return to New Orleans, he ran a serial account of the expedition in the Picayune. Starting on June 17, 1841, the Picayune published 23 of Kendall's letters detailing his experience. In 1844, he published the narrative of the Texan Santa Fe expedition, a 900-page, 2-volume book that is said to have sold 40,000 copies in 8 years. There were just a few illustrations. This action scene includes Kendall's special wagon. Does anybody recognize this man? Actually, if you do, I'll give you $250. Herman Spees was the Isles of Rhine 3rd Commissioner General. In early 1846, before his association with the Isles of Rhine, he relates an unscheduled venture to a Plains Indian treaty. And guess who his host is? Kendall was so kind to invite me along. Before Rangers went along, we arrived at the peace treaty where numerous tribes and Indian nations were represented. I was there for a week when news arrived in our camp of war with Mexico having broken out at the Rio Grande. Kendall immediately set out for the theater of war. So here's Kendall covering one adventure for the Picayune, headed out to another adventure of a lifetime. Kendall was back in the limelight. Between 1846 and 1848, Mexico and the United States waged war over Texas and the Mexican lands of western North America. This turn of events once again put Kendall in the limelight. As he headed to the Texas-Mexican border to cover the unfolding war front of the Picayune, he entered Mexico with the U.S. Army to see firsthand what was going on, and due to his knack for writing and his attention to getting details to the presses first, Kendall became known as the first modern war correspondent and the most widely known reporter in America in his day. Kendall rode with the U.S. generals and soldiers. He was an eyewitness to the key battles of the Mexican War. He watched the dueling cannons of war. Kendall would write about the days of events. This is an actual dispatch dated September 8, 1847. At port, in advance of these battles, Kendall set up riders and routes to the ports. The riders would then rush his letters, notes, and dispatches regarding active battles to the boats on the Mexican coast, and then ship them to the Picayune office in New Orleans, and again, beat the competing newspapers with the latest war on the news. There was a lot of interest in this war in Texas and elsewhere, and due to this, George Wilkin Kendall's stories would make it on the pages of many major newspapers, not just the Picayune. This painting by Richard Canton Woodville is titled War News from Mexico. Here's an actual Picayune supplement on the Battle of Monterey. The war ended in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico recognized the Rio Grande as the border of Texas and signed over all of California, Utah, and Nevada, as well as parts of New Mexico, Arizona, Wyoming, and Colorado. After the Mexican War, Kendall took a boat to Europe for what was meant to be a short vacation and to write a book on the Mexican War. But he postponed writing the book to cover the unfolding events in Europe. In 1848, many countries were undergoing revolts against rulers and monarchies. In France, Kendall met his future wife, Adeline. They married in 1849, and he wound up staying in Europe for 2 years. Their first child, Georgina, was born in 1850. In 1850, Kendall returned to the United States to work on publishing and promoting his book, War Between the United States and Mexico, Illustrated. Here's a flyer. It's a promotional flyer, and depending on the binding, the prices range from $36 to $48. Now, while the cover is not impressive, to illustrate the book, he engaged the talents of German-born Carl Nabel, who was living in Mexico at the time. Given how labor-intensive it was to produce the book, it's easy to see why Kendall only published 500 copies in 1851. He traveled back and forth between the United States and Europe, still writing articles for the Picayune, both in Europe and the United States. And the Picayune continues to have wide influence. Sisterdale pioneer Julius Drazel, after reading about upcoming Indian treaties, reflects optimistically in his diary notes on the possibility of peace. And he details that the Picayune was his source of information. It was during this window of time that Kendall focused on securing land for his next enterprise, raising sheep in the beautiful hill country land that had enchanted him 11 years earlier. In late 1852, while visiting, he describes New Braunfels to his wife as a great German settlement, and later, flushed with pride about finding his ideal home site, writes her about a pleasant and verdant valley, surrounded on all sides by rough, rocky, and rugged mountains with rich grass and a beautiful stream. It was located about 6 miles northwest of New Braunfels. Kendall starts getting ready for ranching operations outside of New Braunfels. After securing his land, he bought several merino sheep while in Europe and had them shipped to Texas. He rolled up his sleeves, working hard, building pens, plowing fields, planting corn. These 4 tracts, totaling about 1,380 acres, constitute the bulk of Kendall's operation outside of New Braunfels. In 1854, Frederick Law Olmsted writes that we had the pleasure of spending an evening in New Braunfels with W Kendall of the New Orleans Picayune. Olmsted has a trip planned to Mexico and seeks some counsel. Kendall was not very encouraging. For Olmsted, we found no particular encouragement toward entering Mexico. We should find the scenery consisting of desert plains and cactus and be robbed each day of something we had. Certain circumstances in his first visit to Mexico we thought might have given him a prematurely unfavorable impression. In 1854, we learned that Kendall has also started a satellite sheep ranch on the 4,000 plus acre Ortiz survey. Located just a few miles east of Bernie, Kendall called it Post Oak Spring Ranch. Much larger than his New Braunfels operation, he now dreamed that this would be the future site of a great ranching establishment. However, one reason for not building there immediately was fear of Indians. Kendall made many trips to Post Oak Spring Ranch, always alert for any sign of Indians. Writing in 1856, well, today I'm not certain that my shepherds have not been killed and scalped and my flock scattered. Within the last month or two, the Indians have been on every side of me. My great good fortune so far has been that the rascals do not seem to have contracted a taste for mutton. 2 years later, Mr. Kendall, in later years, Mr. Kendall kept a diary, and entries from 1857 attest to frequent trips to his satellite ranch. January 4th, 1857, Sunday, reached Post Oak and found mill running, weather drizzly, threatening rain. Put on a new band and went to Bernie for corn for mill. January 5th, 1857, Monday, weather still drizzly. Boarded in the mill building. Mill worked better. No longer involved with the Olive Rhine, former second commissioner John O. Mosebach drops in. February 3rd, 1857, Tuesday, arrived at Post Oak and remained all day. Baron Mosebach came up with corn, stopped the supper. Kendall was constantly bombarded with letters about Texas, all facets, and he said he took the time to answer each, despite the fact that this time he had 2 ranches, 4 large flocks of sheep, a grist mill, and a stock of horses to look after, and a newspaper to write for. To deal with these demands, in 1858, in another classic Kendall move, he sat down and poured all his enthusiasm for Texas into a 3,600 letter and sent it off to Picayune to be printed into circulars. When his bundle of these circulars came from New Orleans, his task of letter writing became simpler. He either mailed a copy to each distant inquirer or sent one along with a hasty note. The status of his 1857-1858 sheep ranching success is published in the 1859 Texas Almanac under the header of G.W. Kendall, Sheep Raising in Texas. In 2 years, his flocks had more than doubled. Now, regionally, Kendall's stature and legend grew. In a letter back to home to his parents, Franz Kettner wrote from Fredericksburg on May 4th, 1859, raising sheep has come to the forefront in Texas. We have received a settler from the northern states who owns 20,000. Well, those numbers were never substantiated by Kendall County tax and estate records, which in 1862 listed 5,300 sheep, and in 1867, 4,600. Still, when you compare his posted numbers to Comal County's entire sheep count of 482 on the agricultural report in 1860, still pretty impressive. About this same time, due to his storied reputation, his promotion of Texas in the Hill Country, and his continually highly successful sheep ranching enterprise, Kendall is touted as a candidate for governor. In 1859, several newspapers and the German residents of both Bernie and New Braunfels launched a campaign to elect him governor. Kendall is genuinely not interested and writes to the San Antonio Herald, "I have no taste for the calling of a politician. I've never been in the business, and I'm too old to learn a new trade." Kendall was available for the December 1859 petition to form a new county. By 1858, Kendall has moved his family from France to his ranch outside of New Braunfels, and then in February 1861, he and his family take up residence at Post Oak Spring Ranch. Kendall's family has grown, 2 girls and 2 boys. Less than 1 year after their move, Kendall County is created on January the 10th, 1862. And 1 week later, Kendall's Native American fears become a personal reality. While Kendall's in the hills to inspect one of the new sheep camps, one of the wives of the shepherds came running into the Kendall residence to say that 4 Indians had chased the head shepherd into the shepherd's house. There were 3 flocks out with shepherds Shasher, Fletchler, and Baptiste. Kendall came home after nightfall to the scene of excitement and confusion and immediately went out to look for the shepherds. 2 flocks came straggling in without dog or shepherd, but the 3rd flock could not be found. As neighbors helped join in the search the next day, the sound of a barking dog led them to the naked body of the young German boy, John Fletchler. He was pierced with 17 arrows and resting against a tree. They followed the trail of Indians down to a rough crossing of a rocky ravine, and there, partially in the water, lay the body of the Mexican shepherd Baptiste with 4 arrows in his back. Kendall fires off a letter to the editor of the San Antonio Herald, an excerpt from his article titled Frontier Protection. But while the blood of the unfortunate shepherds is still moist upon the ground, there are many who at least hope that when the provisions of the new Frontier Protection Bill are carried out, we will have security, but this I doubt. The first Kendall County tax records show that Kendall's amassed 6,000 acres in his new county worth $42,000. Now, earlier I mentioned about when casting about for a new county name, it's easy to see how George Wilkins Kendall's name would have been placed at the top of a short list, as Kendall was so well respected that his name would have been placed at the top of any list. And that was certainly the case for the 1859 petition, and that's literally what you find when going through the Kendall County Commissioner Court minutes. Kendall was a participating member of the new county, and the Kendall County Commissioners put him to work. He was selected as a grand juror on May 18, 1863, as well as one of a 3-member board of school examiners. Please note that regardless of the length of the list or the alphabetic patterns, Mr. Kendall's name is always listed at the top. George Wilkins Kendall rolled up his sleeves during his time in Kendall County, experiencing the ups and downs of working the land through droughts, floods, locusts, wolf attacks, Native American attacks, through loss of animals, loss of employees, loss of lives, through northers and intense heat. He quietly died at his ranch of congestive chills on October 21st, 1867, at the age of 58. Longtime Picayune business associate A.M. Holbrook places Kendall's obituary in regional newspapers. Kendall is buried in the Burney Cemetery. His is the only Burney gravesite with a Texas Historical Commission marker. Though accessible and on private property today, in 1836, Texas's centennial year, this is the year when first historical markers were first placed in the ground throughout Texas, Kendall's Post Oak Spring Ranch was given a marker. Now, Post Oak Spring Ranch, over time, has been divided into many ranches, lots, yet you do not need permission to traverse Post Oak Spring Ranch, and you've done so many times already. Every time you travel across State Highway 46 East to and from Burney, 3 miles of your route cuts a diagonal through the heart of George Wilkins Kendall's land. In conclusion, with all his accomplishments, George Wilkins Kendall was certainly worthy of his own book, Kendall of the Picayune, which Fayette Copeland wrote 79 years ago. First published in 1843, it's still the standard on Kendall and served as a major source of background material for this presentation. Thank you.
You guys have any questions?
Oh, yeah, okay, I said 1836. My wife caught this.
1936.
Yes, 1936.
Does anybody have any questions for Ryden?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead. I'll get you.
Why was the governor of New Mexico so hostile to them?
Well, there was some thought that the soldiers concerned him. There was some thought that this could be an occupation with the soldiers being in attendance. And so, and there was some thought of that by the Republic of Texas. They were hoping to not only get trade, but to actually bring New Mexico into Texas. That was part of the plan. So that they were concerned. They didn't want that to happen. And so that's why they arrested
So they
him.
saw the part perhaps subversive.
Pardon?
They might have seen it as subversive.
Yeah, they were concerned it's somewhat of a possibly invasion. And there were a lot of soldiers. I don't think they were going to try to occupy. That's not what they were planning. But they were there, and so it just played into that scenario. Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm going to let him go. Then I got you, Joe. Go ahead.
You may have covered this, but I was going down another trail when you were talking about the imprisonment in Mexico.
Yes.
How long was he imprisoned and how was he released?
Well, some of those details are foggy with me because some of this material I researched a long time ago. But when we say 7 years he was in captivity, that includes when he was arrested in New Mexico. So he had different people try to bribe the Mexican government to release him over time. He was imprisoned first in an area that literally probably were lepers in a leopard confined area. He was taken to Perote prison. He talks about, but I can't honestly answer the exact time he was imprisoned in Mexico. I can easily find that and get the answer to that to you. He talked about, he demanded to be removed from one of the facilities that he didn't, I guess, away from the lepers, and they put him somewhere else, and immediately he was attacked by bed bugs. I mean, it was a monster attack. I mean, it was like he couldn't get any sleep, and so, it was like the old situation was better to be with the lepers than be, attacked at night by bed bugs. I mean, you can't sleep under those conditions. So, it wasn't a pleasant experience at all when he was in prison in Mexico. But they had, again, influential friends. He's well known, very concerned. So when you go in the gallery, you can see kind of a delay of understanding what happened to Kendall. One of the selections of the Picayune that's going to be posted on the wall talks about they finally got some news they felt comfortable about, and that the Santa Fe expedition had failed. But this is way past the failing of the expedition. And they even get some of the news is from Cuba. I mean, I don't know. I didn't answer your original question, but I hope it filled in a lot of other blanks.
You did like it, yeah.
Okay.
We'll send me an email, or I'll give you my card, and we'll if
I can
you're
give you
dying,
the
if you're
answer.
burning to the answer, we'll figure it out for you.
We'll get
Can you
it.
guys hear in the back, or does he need to be on the mic? Are y'all hearing okay, Catherine? Okay. Okay, Joe.
All right, so what did they have in the expedition? What did they load into the wagons?
Honestly, don't know.
Yeah,
I think it's
I'm curious.
manufactured goods because they were going to try to come back with, again, bullion and furs. So I would
They
think
had
it's,
to have something to.
yeah, I honestly don't know what's in those wagons. No, I never researched.
Might be in the book.
Mine.
Probably. Yeah. Okay.
Me?
Yeah.
Was New Mexico a province of Mexico or what?
Yeah, it was part of Mexico, and they did have, I don't know if it's actually a province, but it probably was, because then they call it New Mexico.
So they did
And that's
call it
where they
New-
got their Novo Mexico, yeah, so.
Anyone else?
Was the Indian attack you talked about, was that Comanches?
Yeah, they believe it was. You're talking about that attacked his ranch? Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was an eyewitness that saw him head toward, there was a newspaper article in the Murray paper that I came across many years ago. And there was an eyewitness, a guy slipped into the bushes and they went right past him and they were headed to Kendall's ranch. They had killed a German settler named Donna around Wasp Creek first. They came to Bernie down from Wasp Creek, which is going toward Sister Sister Dam. So they were coming in, the Pinna Trail ranged through there. So, or the Camino Santiago, you may have been partially, any of them, or anything in between. So then they came into Bernie, and a man named Reinhardt was killed in Bernie, and then they marched over to Kendall's ranch. They found the third shepherd several weeks later. He was much further away. They even say, I think Kendall took a bloody head of an animal up to Austin and plopped it down on a table. He was so mad about the French. And you got to understand, now we're in the Confederate environment. This is a Confederately managed state at this time. So, it's not the same government. It's not the same Texas government. So, they were getting posses. A lot of times Germans would volunteer instead of being conscripted. They would volunteer for frontier protection. And then they dissolved that after a year or two because they felt that was part of insurrection. The Confederates did. So
where did I read? You had the one source in the story about the killing the shepherds.
yes.
What would I have read, or where did you get that from? What was the detail?
That was definitely from Kendall the Picayune.
Okay, so was there a full publication that I read then about?
Well, you possibly read, as a matter of fact, Dick Thomason has the original book. If you turn around and look at it, and we've got a copy of that actually going to be on the display cabinet that people can just pick up and peruse when you go into the gallery today.
And there's a copy for checkout too. We have a copy upstairs in the circulation, the biography section.
Yeah.
Didn't Garland Perry have something written in a Tice account in his book? I
don't think it was about that.
Well, there is a passage, and it has to do. Yeah, it is.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, and just tangentially, what it is a man's son wanted to go out and help Reinhardt, and he said, no, it's foggy, and these are ripe conditions for Native American attacks, and it was a foggy day, and so they did attack, and this man was killed probably where the railroad tracks are today, the old hike and bike trail that was formerly the railroad tracks that went through Bernie. They say that's about the area that he was killed or found in. So it was a tight area. I mean, Bernie was not a big city.
Was that Judge Reinhardt, or was he later?
No, they mistakenly had said it was the Reinhardt, but it was not Reinhardt. Another family member wrote in and said, no, it wasn't this Reinhardt. Supposedly he was out getting wood for the St. James Hotel, that's the story you read. And St. James Hotel was right across from Main Plaza. Probably were, oh gosh.
Is that where Civil Medicine is now? Civil Family
in
Medicine?
that general area, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, right there. Or
Directly
Blacksmith.
across from the Dinger.
Blacksmith.
Directly across from the Dinger.
Across Main.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
We have pictures of it.
we do.
Well, these are penetrating questions. I'm afraid I haven't answered half
Yeah,
of
it's
them.
okay. We'll take one more. Yeah. No, you should. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What was the population size of Bernie from that time?
Oh, I've got that matrix that I built by researching that. And so we're talking not very big. I mean, I'm going to say 800 off the hand. Val's original research. I would guess about 800. That's just guessing. I've got that specific information. So.
That's a pretty sizable number, though, considering the time, right?
Well, yeah, plotted in 52. This is 62 attacks, so it's 10 years later. So I only have it obviously by 10-year increments. And those early increments are estimated. And sometimes they accumulated precincts, which the precinct said it was, so because it was a certain precinct, they would have that information in Bernie, but there really wasn't. It was a ranch that was 5 miles away. Well, that wasn't Bernie proper. So some of that gets melded into the data that we say is a population base for Bernie. But I think I tried to remove those when I tried to estimate the population. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank